Hey there, Pastor Marc here. It's our prayer that this message would encourage and equip you in your relationship with Jesus. We're able to provide this content due to the joyful generosity of our financial partners. And if you'd be willing to join that tribe and help get some sermons like this around the world, you can donate at harvestbaptist.info/give. God bless. Go to Jude this morning. I do want to say, of course, not just to you, but to our TV audience, that we normally don't have a stage like this. I feel bad for the people who are going to tune into Fox next Sunday, and they're going to have no context, and they're just going to be like, what in the world happened to their stage? There's a fake cactus behind him, but I guess they'll figure it out. If you're watching on Fox, VBS is tomorrow. So I was at Walmart this week. Well, I was there a few times actually because we live really close and we go over there to shop. But I was there on Friday, on July 4th. Walmart had their grand reopening. If you are from Harrison Township and you're there a bit, you know they've been remodeling the store since about March or so. And they're officially done with the remodel, and there's like a portrait of the Bertner house, like now as you go in. There's some really cool stuff in there that they've done. But they had the grand reopening ceremony. I did not know this was a thing until we were invited to come, and they said, would you pray over the store and over the grand reopening? And I said, I guess. I didn't know you could pray over a Walmart like that. But it was awesome. It was great to see the associates and what they've been through in the store and play a small part in that. Walmart's been a tremendous partner for us. They sponsor our Shop with the Heroes event every December, where we pair up first responders with just some kids in our community who have needs and send them on a shopping spree, and they subsidize that and help us with that. And they've helped us with our Amazing Shake, which is a middle school event we do every February. And they actually helped us out again. They not only had me pray, but they presented, I was there, and Pastor Rousey was there, and Linda Miller was there. They presented us with, they gave us a PlayStation to give away for Amazing Shake, and a $500 gift card, and then a check for $1,000, and just tried to bless us as a community partner, which was really awesome. But I was there and prayed. And then there was another individual who had a part in the ceremony, Chief Turak, the Harrison Township Chief of Police, who's a great friend to us and just an all-around stand-up guy, tremendous guy. And we're standing kind of stage left, waiting to be called up and to go do our part. And little did we know it was going to be like an hour long. If you wonder how long is a grand reopening, it's like a church service. It's a long ordeal. So we're standing there, we're in the sun, we're sweating, but we're just chit-chatting and getting to know, hey, what's going on in your world, what's going on in our world, and we're flim-flamming back and forth and talking. And as I stood there and I thought about the police department that is in Fawn Township or Harrison Township or all around us, and our first responders, and I thought about our firefighters. Many of you are volunteer firefighters, and we thank you for that, and we're so grateful for your labor of love. It just made me grateful for our first responders afresh and anew, and it made me think about this text, actually. I didn't have a title for this text until kind of late in the week. I just thought first responders that's the right call for this title. This text in Jude is really all about our first responders, really our spiritual first responders. And Jude, who has been going layer after layer after layer and giving us all that we need to know about false teachers and apostates and how they operate and what they think and what they do and what they say. And then last week he turned the corner and he began to say, well, hey, I have some instruction for you. I want you to keep yourself in the love of God. I want you to stay right there in God's love. Now, before he gets to the doxology, this praise of God, which is next week, he gives us two just power-packed verses on how those who are remaining in the love of God should respond not necessarily to the apostates or the false teachers. We've already got that. This is how we should respond to those who are being affected or maybe even infected by the false teachers. What should our approach be to them? Specifically, what is our disposition and what are our actions as we try to engage with people that are beginning to buy into false doctrine, false teaching, false ways of thinking, sinful ways of behaving? how should we respond to them? How should we treat them? How should we act towards them? And here it is in 2 verses, 4 phrases, 2 verses. And there's a lot here, but I want to read them together. Verse 22, of some have compassion, making a difference. And others, verse 23, save with fear, pulling them out of the fire, hating even the garment spotted by the flesh. Each of these phrases are very terse and jam-packed with meaning. It's almost as if Jude spring-loaded these verses with implication. There are 4 distinct phrases, and if you can understand these 4, you'll understand what he's getting at. And I want to give you a word for each 4. These are the 4 words on which we will hang our thoughts this morning. The words are compassion, intervention, triage, and hygiene. Compassion, intervention, triage, and hygiene. Those are the 4 words. If you can remember those, you'll get this text. First is compassion. You can see it right away in the phrase, of some have compassion. This word for compassion in the Greek, it's used 31 times in the New Testament. Only twice is it translated compassion. Generally speaking, it's translated mercy. Some Bible translations will say have mercy. It's a fine, appropriate thing to say, but it means the same thing. Have a strong affection of God's love toward people that are in some sort of misery. Specifically, the type of misery that is in view here are those who have begun to doubt, perhaps their faith. They begin to question maybe the goodness of God or the authority of the Bible, or if God really can be trusted, and they're in doubt. Some translations will say have mercy on those who are doubting. It's an appropriate way to look at this. They're going back and forth on what they believe, and it seems like maybe their doubts are louder than their faith. What do you do in those situations? Well, one thing you could do that would be appropriate would be to have compassion. Not to be cold, not to be condescending, not to be judgmental towards those that are doubting, but to actually have compassion and mercy and love and patience and tenderness. To try not to be dismissive, to try not to be apathetic, to try not to be harsh, which is something that we could be prone to if someone who has been in the faith and you see them as part of your church or part of your small group or part of the faith, and all of a sudden they have these questions that are new, and where are these coming from? You used to be so solid. You taught people to believe this stuff. How are you questioning this now? And if you're not careful, you could be judgmental, you could be critical, you could look down your nose, you could dismiss them. Parents, I think, are especially prone to this as you raise your children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. They make a profession of faith. They're baptized. Perhaps they go to a Christian school, or you homeschool them and you try to make sure that they are around good Christian influences, and they begin to grow and they make decisions, and you've seen them pray, and then all of a sudden they're 16 years old and they have these new questions. And as a parent, you could be tempted to say, you know better. You've learned this since you were 2nd grade. How could you be doubting this? You could tend to be very impatient and harsh and not actually give their questions or their doubts the time of day. And what Jude is saying is there are appropriate times where you just need a compassionate, tender, meek, gentle response to someone to allow them to have some questions and some doubts and to wrestle with some stuff, or to even have blips on the radar where they sin. We all sin sometimes, and to not always cut their head off for it. But sometimes just show them some love and some mercy and some compassion and come alongside them. Not everyone needs a kick in the pants. Sometimes they need an arm around their shoulder. Sometimes they just need some love. And they need some patience, and they're going to wrestle. Listen, questions and doubts, those things happen to the best of us. If you're wondering how you should respond, or if you could have an example or a window into this, think of Jesus' own. Did he not have one who doubted? He had one who went apostate, and it's not even but 3 or 4 days later, it's less than a week after the one who's apostate goes apostate, that now there's a doubter, right? Doubting Thomas wasn't doubting Thomas until Judas went apostate. And there's this ripple effect that happens through the death of Jesus, through the betrayal of Judas, Then now he's doubting. And what does Jesus do with doubting Thomas? Rip his head off? Thomas, come on, man, get with the program. Look around. There's 10 other guys who have faith, who believe I rose from the dead. Why can't you get on board? Why are you doubting? What's wrong with you? That's not what he does. What does he do? Thomas, you need to see my hands? You have doubts? Let me step into those doubts. Let me help you with those doubts gently. Go ahead. Touch my hands. You want to see my side? What doubts do you have that I can help you with, Thomas? Right, all of a sudden, Thomas, with this gentle, compassionate response of Jesus, where he meets him in his doubts, all of a sudden those doubts begin to dissipate, and all of a sudden his faith begins to be renewed, and all of a sudden he becomes a leader in the church because Jesus met him with compassion. There are so many times where there are people who are affected, who they see this TikTok video or this Instagram reel, or they have this friend that they work with who's telling them a half-truth and a half-lie about this or that in the Bible, and it can't be trusted, and it doesn't mean this, and what about this, and what about that? And all of a sudden they begin to question, or their philosophy class in college, or whatever it is, starts to make them back up and rethink, or perhaps they just fall into some sin and they remove themselves from the love of God effectively, and they just don't feel that relationship with God, and now their head's spinning. Sometimes they need some compassion in their life. I'm reminded of the words of Paul to Timothy when he told Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter number 2 that the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle to all men, apt to teach, patient, listen to this, in meekness, instructing those that oppose themselves. Patiently, meekly, teaching, instructing. If God peradventure will give them to repentance, to the knowledge of the truth, that they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil. Here's someone who is in a snare of the devil, who is on a wrong path, who is about to blow up their life. And he says, Timothy, there are times where you have to patiently, meekly, gently just teach and help and come alongside and try to get them back on the right path. There are times where you need compassion. You say, well, Pastor, I know my Bible. I'm pretty sure Paul told Timothy in other places to reprove and to rebuke and to be heavy-handed. Well, you're right, and so does Jude. Because it's not just compassion, there's also intervention. At times, you need to be this sort of shepherd to shaken people, and at other times, you need to be a fireman to fallen people. He mentions in verse number 23, others save with fear, pulling them out of the fire. Now, what does he mean, pulling them out of the fire? Well, in the context of the book, he's referring to God's judgment. There are those who are going the wrong way and believing the wrong things, and they are going to be subject to God's judgment. He said that over and over and over again. And these are people, unlike those who are just doubting or just tiptoeing through maybe some ill-informed behavior or some sin. They have been entranced by the false teachers. They have been seduced by the false teachers, and they are playing with fire. And there are moments where they don't need compassion or a hug, but they do need a kick to the pants, where they do need to be snatched out of the fire, reclaimed, rescued, restored to a right relationship with God. I was reminiscent of a moment in my life when I was 9th or 10th grade and I was in New Orleans. My father was a youth pastor for decades, and he was invited for a span of about 7 to 10 years to speak. It was in the winter. It was always in the February, March timeframe, to go to New Orleans and to speak at another church's youth winter retreat. This church would travel to New Orleans. Their pastor had grown up in New Orleans, and he knew the city well. And they'd get a hotel, and they'd explore the city, and they'd do lots of stuff. And they would have like services in the morning and the evening. They'd have devotionals and sermons, and my dad would preach it. And he would take us, not always, but pretty regularly, he would take us boys with him to New Orleans. And we actually grew to really love the city. If you've ever been to New Orleans, you know it's one of those places you go and it just has its own vibe and character and food, and it's just its own thing. And if you love Cajun food or spicy food, or you've never had it, go to New Orleans. I'm telling you, it's fantastic. But we were there, and I was 9th or 10th grade, and my youngest brother was probably 5th or 6th grade at the time. And we were coming out of it's kind of a riverfront mall, and we were coming to these tracks. They weren't train tracks, they were trolley tracks. And there wasn't an arm that came down to tell you when the train was coming. The trolley just came by. And my younger brother is just bebopping along, and as fate would have it today, we have a train and we have tracks, so this will work very, very well. Sorry, over there, you're gonna see my back for a little bit. He's bebopping along, paying no attention. We're coming up to the tracks, and there's a trolley. It's not screaming down the tracks, but it's moving. If you get hurt by or hit by this, odds are you're dead or you're at least very hurt. And he's just going along, and it's about right there. And he's about right here, and he goes to step right in front of this trolley. With us was Danny Delaney, who some of you that would mean nothing to, but many of you would remember Tim Delaney, who was our youth pastor here at Harvest for a decade. His oldest brother, why was his brother with you in New Orleans? It's a long story. But his oldest brother was with us, Danny. And Danny screamed at my younger brother, and he grabbed him as hard as he could by the back of his shirt, and he pulled him backwards, and that trolley went right by him. I mean, he was a half second away from being smacked by a train. He pulled him back, he fell to the ground, I mean, just absolutely kind of shaken on what in the world just happened. We were all grateful. It's this huge moment, right? But when my youngest brother was in a perilous situation and about to die, Danny didn't whisper a suggestion. And we're glad he didn't whisper a suggestion. He was forceful, he was urgent, he did not care if my brother fell down and scuffed his elbow. He was not concerned about a little bit of collateral damage. He didn't care about any of that. He was trying to save his life. There are moments where there are people who are so headlong into sin or false teaching that you've got to do everything you can to save their life and to pull them out of the fire. And it's not time for compassion. It's not time to talk for a month. It's not time to put your arm around them. It's time to grab them by the shirt and try to pull them out as best you possibly can. There's compassion and there is intervention. You see this actually modeled so beautifully in the ministry of Jesus. And sometimes people get very off kilter because they take one iteration of Jesus or one mode of Jesus and they think that that's the only way to act. There are moments where Jesus is compassionate and he has a woman caught in adultery and he says, listen, I'm not going to judge you. Go and sin no more. There are also moments where there are scribes and Pharisees, and he looks at them and says, you generation of vipers, you're full of dead men's bones. He flips tables. And sometimes people take the intervention Jesus and they just say, we're just going to go through life like a bulldozer and just intervene with everybody about everything all the time. And that's not right. Sometimes, not all the time. Then there are others who look at the compassionate melt in your mouth Jesus and they say, well, we should just be compassionate and loving and patient and never have any intervention. That's wrong too. Jude does a great job, Jesus does a great job of modeling for us that both of these need to happen. There's actually one of my favorite verses about the Lord Jesus that describes who he is one that is not well known, but it's in Matthew chapter number 12. Where Matthew tells us that Jesus is the fulfillment of an Isaiah prophecy. And he says these words about Jesus, which I think encapsulate this idea, that there is compassion and intervention mingled together. He says, Jesus was here that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, verse 20, a bruised reed shall he not break, a smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory. Now, if you're anything like me, you read those words and you think, what in the world does that mean? On one hand, Isaiah said that the Messiah would be someone who was a person of absolute power and majesty. Someone who would, quote, send forth judgment unto victory. We might say it as someone who will conquer all the evil. Someone who is just and righteous and fierce. And there's a clash of good versus evil, and good wins. And and there's judgment and justice. On the other hand, Isaiah said that this Messiah would be someone who was so sensitive and so tender and so gentle that a bruised reed, that which could be broken by the slightest mishandling. You're talking about the fragile of the fragile. A reed that is already fractured and bruised, he won't break that. A smoking flax, this wick that is flickering and starting to smoke, this wick that is 1 second away from being snuffed out and the fire's gone. A smoking flax, he won't quench that. He won't snuff it out. It's Isaiah's way of predicting that the Messiah was going to be someone who was both, someone who could take a bruised heart or a life that was about to be snuffed out, as it were, and be so tender and compassionate and meek and gentle with them and handle them with kid gloves, while at the same time being a conquering warrior who would bring forth justice and righteousness. And these traits don't war with each other in Jesus. They unite with each other in Jesus and become something that is so perfectly beautiful that there is both compassion and there is intervention. There is both justice and righteousness and tenderness and mercy, both united. And Jude is calling Christians to be both, to understand that as spiritual first responders, you're going to have to be both with people. Now, there's $1 million question, which is, well, when am I supposed to be both? Which one? Like, am I supposed to just Jekyll and Hyde this and like one day choose compassion and the next day choose intervention and whoever crosses my path, good luck? Like, which one am I supposed to be? Well, he gives you at least a hint as to how you should think through this, and it's just simply that you should think through it, and it's in the phrase right in between these two. Some have compassion, some save with fear, pulling them out of the fire. There's a phrase in between, which is making a difference. That is an English phrase that's rooted in one Greek word, and that Greek word means to judge or to discern. Sometimes it's translated as doubting, and there are some translations that take the two phrases, have compassion, make a difference, and they put them together as one. Mercifully go to the doubting. That actually is a poor way to do it. It's two distinct thoughts, compassion and intervention, making a difference. We think make a difference as go make a positive impact in that situation. That is not what it's saying. That's a good idea, but it's not what it's saying. It is not go be a positive influence on that person. To make a difference, you would say it this way perhaps, differentiate or make a discernment. Or as someone who doubts, who weighs out in their head, what's right, what's wrong, is this right, is that wrong? It's the same idea. You're gonna have to weigh out, am I supposed to be compassionate? Am I supposed to be merciful? Am I supposed to be hard? Do they need a hug? Do they need a kick? What do they need right now? You have to be able to discern that. You have to be able to differentiate or literally parse it out and figure out what do they need in this moment. Now, you're not going to do this perfectly. You're not going to do this perfectly, but there is a call to differentiate between when you need to make a judgment here and figure out who needs what. I think the best people at this, like the world-class differentiators to figure out who needs a hug or who needs a kick, are mothers. How many of you would be able to say, I had a mom who at times I was acting the fool, but she knew I was just having a rough day. My girlfriend broke up with me, or I had just had a long day at work, or I was just extra tired or whatever, and she knew, even though I was being an idiot, that she could just put her arm around me and give me some love and some compassion, and it broke me down, and it helped me, and it put me back on the right path. But that same mom, at times, could look at me and say, I brought you into this world, I'll take you out of this world. She was the same one, like, I'll rip you limb from limb. And she could look at me and like stare through my soul and just absolutely murder me with that glare. How many of you had a mom like this? She could do both. You know what I'm talking about? I think moms oftentimes have this ability. I know my wife has this ability where there are times where my wife is always so good and so respectful and never steps on my toes or puts me down in front of the kids. But there are moments where I'm responding to the children in a particular way, and I'm trying to help them. I'm trying to put them back on track. I'm trying to get them, to not punch their brother or whatever they're doing. But I'm defaulting into more of the prophetic voice and more of the maybe my tone's a little harsher. And she can I get nowhere, I corrected, I reproved, I intervened, but you can tell your kids, there's a wall up, they're not listening, they don't care. I'm talking about parents, where you're talking, but you're getting nowhere. And she can come in and sit down next to them on the bed, put her arm around them. Hey, what's going on? And all of a sudden, they just open up. And they start to respond, and I'm like, stink! I differentiated the wrong way. They needed compassion, and they didn't need intervention in this moment. It's a call to be able to figure this out and to do our best to figure it out. You say, well, how in the world am I supposed to figure that out? First and foremost, with the help of the Holy Spirit. All right, we need to bathe this in prayer. We need to ask for his help. We don't need to be a one-trick pony. We don't need to treat every problem as something that needs kids' gloves, and we don't need to treat every problem as though it needs a sledgehammer. This is, I think, just a good life lesson in general, in a culture that tells us, you, be true to yourself, live your truth. It'll tell you, you be who you are, and you just operate that way, have one mode of operation, whatever is true to you, and let the chips fall where they may. That's terrible advice biblically. That's also terrible advice practically. Jude's on to something here when he tells you, try to not ask, who am I? Try to ask, what do they need? What do they need? This is a great lesson for a parent. This is a great lesson for a boss. This is a great lesson if you have any sort of friendships at all. What do they need in this moment? How would they best respond? Let me meet them where they're at and get them from where they're at to where they need to go. But let me try to edit my approach. You say, well, I just feel like I'm a chameleon or I'm adaptive. I feel that's insincere. No, I'm sincerely trying to help you, but I want to do it in a way that you will receive. Does that make sense? So discern, differentiate, find them, and do your best to see them along, but pray about it. Ask the Holy Spirit for his guidance. Beyond that, I do want to try to help you today. I want to say up front, I don't do a lot of this, but I want to at times just give you general, practical, pastoral advice that you need to take with a grain of salt. I'm not claiming that what I'm about to give you is gospel. I do not have a verse for each one of these. It is just what I have observed over the years pastorally. But there is kind of a continuum of, if you had compassion on one side and intervention on the other side, there are different avatars or portraits of people that need more compassion than intervention and some that need more intervention than compassion. I want to give you 5 different portraits or 5 different avatars of people to help you that in my experience, what I've learned is this person needs heavy compassion or this type of person needs heavy intervention. So I'm going to start on the heavy end of compassion and work our way all the way to intervention. Here they are. First is wounded willow. This is the person who is hurt, they are not hardened. It is someone who is in many ways grieving their faith, but they're not fleeing their faith. And they need far more comfort than they need correction. If you're trying to triage who needs what, you have to know that you're going to come across some people who are doubting their faith, but the reason they're doubting their faith is because they've been hurt. It could be that there was some sort of trauma, some sort of abuse, some sort of failure where they had a spiritual leader or a pastor or a youth pastor up on a pedestal, and then they found out that they were living in sin or there was some sort of fall. But it naturally causes them to take a step back and say, man, is this even real? Is my faith even sincere? I thought theirs was sincere and it's not. Is mine even sincere? And it starts to put them in a mode of doubting and questioning and hurting and wondering, and you need to be very compassionate with those people. It is not the time to slap them upside the head. And for the record, when I say kick or slap, I'm not meaning literally, just in case any of you would take it that far. But they don't need a slap. They don't need a lot of correction. They need a lot of comfort. Your heart is to restore them, not to reject them. They don't need you to point your finger in their face. A little further towards intervention, but still heavy on the compassionate side, would be what I'm going to call burned Blake. This is the person who just had a lot of false teaching about Christianity or about Jesus. Oftentimes, well-intentioned bad teaching, but they were painted a picture of Jesus that wasn't accurate. And they perhaps were very programmed even to be moralistic or legalistic or maybe even hedonistic, that they were told that you have your liberty in Jesus and it doesn't really matter if you sin. There's grace that covers everything. And so your sin's just not a big deal at all. But they've been kind of programmed the wrong way and they begin to recognize that it's false and wrong. And oftentimes what they'll do is instead of reforming that faith and realizing I'm going to take the good, but I'm going to leave the bad. I'm going to chew up the chicken and spit out the bone. They decide I'm done with it altogether. They're going to need a little bit of correction, but they're going to need predominantly compassion. They're going to need a space to ask their questions. They're going to need time to see that there's a real deal and that not everybody is a hypocrite. They're going to need a lot of love. Hey, come to the church picnic and come to group and put your arm around them and see them grow little by little by little. In the middle is the shallow Christian. We'll call this person Shallow Silas. This person's very sincere, they're just very shaky. They've never been discipled, they've never been rooted, they've never been grounded. And because of that, they don't understand that false teachers prey on ignorance. False teachers deal in ignorance. It's what they're looking for. People that have a sincere heart to please the Lord, but they just really don't know enough to know what is right and what is wrong, and they can be led off course very easily. This person is not unreachable, they're just untaught. And this person really needs kind of a 50-50. They at times need wake-up calls, and they need a coach or a pastor or a friend in their life to tell them, listen, stop watching that YouTube channel, it's trash. They also need people to patiently teach them what is the truth, and you have to have a mix of both with a shaky Silas. It's someone who's never been discipled, but they're easily deceived, and you have to kind of 50-50 it with them. On approaching more towards the intervention side, where you're going to have a small dose of compassion, but maybe a heavy dose of intervention, would be Trendy Terra. This is the I long to belong Christian. This is that Christian who wants acceptance more than they want accuracy. They're longing for love more than they're longing for truth. This is the person who isn't angry at the church, they're just embarrassed by the church. As a kid who grew up in church my whole life, I can remember seasons of my life where this was the case. I wasn't rebellious, although I was doing things that could have been interpreted as rebellious. I was just embarrassed by Christianity or by how we acted or what we did or what we wouldn't do, and I just wanted to fit in, which is understandable. There should be some compassion there because we all have some sort of primal longing for acceptance. We can relate with that. We can relate with wanting to fit in with your friends or your neighbors or the people that you work with at the custard store or wherever it is. But we also need to be able to have a heavy dose of truth and help them see where this is going to lead and be able to tell them this is not right and acceptable, and now you're starting to do and say things that you just should not be doing, and there's going to be judgment that comes because of this. Like, God's watching. There is a version of that people need at times that is somewhat compassionate, but predominantly an intervention. Then you have who I'll just call Rebel Rex. I tried to use names that aren't that common so that they wouldn't fit very many of you and you wouldn't feel pigeonholed into any of these. But this is someone who they just want to do what they want to do. They like their sin, they want to sin. And this is tough because Rebel Rex will oftentimes talk like Wounded Willow. Rebel Rex has a unique, uncanny ability to reinterpret history and to start to paint themselves in the church world as the one who stood for truth and fought the establishment. And those leaders, those people were wrong. I was on the right side of this. And now they have a new verse or series of verses to justify their behavior that is inherently unbiblical. And they'll package their rebellion oftentimes in spiritual terms and try to portray themselves as the hero of the story, not the villain. But oftentimes it is, not all the time, but many times, just a ploy for them to be able to do what they want. And that what they're trying to do is get you to be compassionate so that they don't have to feel conviction, so that they don't have to have that hard conversation. But what they need, if you have Rebel Rex needs a hard conversation. Rebel Rex needs an intervention and to be told, listen, this is where you're headed. I love you, but this is not right. You have to stop. You're telling yourself the wrong story. You're doing the wrong things. Now, are these 5 the only 5 people you're going to come across when you're trying to be a spiritual first responder? No. Do these sometimes mingle and blend with each other? Yes. Do you need loads of discernment and the help of the Holy Spirit? Absolutely, 100%. But it can help to give you at least a sketch of different people that approach maybe their doubts or questioning Christianity from different angles, and perhaps how you would respond and to be able to triage them accordingly. If you work as a triage nurse, you know the art of this. Someone comes into the hospital and you have to triage them. Is this someone who needs to go to the OR immediately? Is this someone who needs a trip to the ICU? Stat! Or is this someone who has a kidney stone and it's going to hurt, but they can wait in the waiting room for a little while and they'll be just fine if we leave them there for an hour, right? You have to be able to discern that. Likewise, spiritually, as a first responder, you got to triage. You got to differentiate who needs compassion and who needs intervention. Now, the last phrase is the last phrase that Jude gave us, that, quote, we should hate even the garment spotted by the flesh. This speaks to the idea of hygiene. It speaks to the idea that you should be a saint who stays clean. And I'm so glad that Jude, via the inspiration of God, gives this to us. What Jude is communicating is that a well-meaning Christian can enter into the ministry of mercy and truly, sincerely want to help someone. But their compassion, if you're not careful, will become complicity. And that complicity, if you're not careful, will become compromise. That you can be so compassionate that you never tell them the truth, and you never tell them that they need to change, and you're just the sounding board, and you start to become complicit, and then if you're not careful, you could even be sucked into the same vortex of doubt or sin that this person is caught in, that you're trying to get them out of. You can be sucked into the same thing. Jude is leveraging actually something that Jewish people would have known. This is basically a compression of some verses in Zechariah that is talking about unclean garments and wanting to stay clean from them and get them off of you and make sure you keep your distance. It would be like us saying, if I came into the hospital for a kidney stone, the nurse, although I hope she washes her hands, she doesn't have to take extreme sanitary measures. But if I walk into the hospital with the bubonic plague, she's going to treat me differently, correct? The mask, the gloves, the washing, the quarantine, all of it, I will be treated differently because I'm highly contagious, and they want to be sure in their effort to help me that they don't hurt themselves. This is Jude's very creative, colorful way of saying, in your effort to go be a spiritual first responder and have compassion and have intervention and to be able to figure out who needs what, you need to be sure that you don't hurt yourself while you help them. You need to love the sinner and hate the sin, and you need to keep your distance from the uncleanness that is the sin that you're about to help. Don't be engaged in that. Really, this is a compression of Galatians 6. If you know Galatians 6, then this will start to ring a bell, but this is kind of an elaboration of this idea that you would hate the garment spotted by the flesh, or you would try to keep good hygiene. Galatians 6 tells us that if a man is overtaken in a fault, listen to this, you which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness. Now that sounds a lot like Jude, doesn't it? Someone who's struggling, their sins getting the better of them, you're going to go alongside them, you're going to help them. There's even a spirit of meekness here. Listen to the last phrase, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. When you go help them, you better have discernment, wisdom, and propriety, and be sure that you don't get caught up in what you're trying to save them from. That's an important lesson. Not every Christian should help every sinner. Now don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you don't love that person. I'm not saying you're not willing to get them help. But if you have a deep background in addiction, it may not be the wisest idea to help someone who's struggling with the same hard drug that you always struggled with, that's still a temptation for you today. You may not want to be at their house trying to pull them out because you may end up just doing the drugs with them. You may want to find someone who's never struggled with that and say, would you go with me? Or would you go yourself? You may have to distance yourself at times to be sure that you're not also tempted and hooked into that. That make sense? This is why as a pastor, I do very little counseling with females alone. It's not to say that I never have a phone call or a text message, or I'm not that far where that can never happen. My wife has access to all my stuff. She can look at any of it when she wants. But I do very little like counseling, sitting down for an hour just with a female to hear their story and to try to help them. If that does happen, it is very quickly, let's find you another female to come alongside and help you. Because I know me. I don't want to be spending loads of time alone with some other woman or some other guy's wife. I don't want to do that. I don't want there to even be a temptation in any way, shape, or form. I want to steer clear of that. There's a million applications of this, but it's the idea that you would have some sort of common sense when you're engaging with sin or sinners and not just be sucked into it. A classic example of someone who was very bad at this is actually William Gladstone. Gladstone served in the House of Commons for 27 years, and he was the prime minister in England. And by all accounts, he was a very distinguished Christian gentleman. He was committed to his personal growth in Jesus. But later in his life, after a long life of living for God, Gladstone started a ministry on the streets of London to prostitutes. Now, you may guess where this is going. His biographer in 1850 said that Gladstone, over a period of 5 years, he did kick the habit, so to speak, and eventually recover from his sin. But over a course of 5 years, engaged with estimated 80 to 90 different prostitutes in an effort to help and pull them out of, he is not only hurting himself, but keeping them in. And it is someone who failed Galatians 6, consider yourself lest you be tempted, or failed Jude's instruction to hate the garment even spotted by the flesh. There is a measure of common sense and wisdom and a Holy Spirit direction that you need. You can't help everyone in every situation on their terms all the time. There at times has to be some quarantining. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to get you help. I have a heart of love. I have compassion. Always, always. But it may be that they're better suited. Or it may be that you need to come to church so we can talk. Let's not meet at the bar. Right? Sometimes you just need to have some common sense. And Jude is saying, I want you to be people who are not only on the lookout for false teachers, identifying them, spotting them, recognizing them, but also on the lookout for those that are in their wake and under the influence of their voice. And I want you to help them too. I want you with compassion and intervention to try to wisely navigate these waters, and I want you to guard yourself and have hygiene while you do it.